message in January, stay south. And I know a lot of Midwesterners come south. And I happen to be going around doing this, it's colder, but I started bragging a little bit because I was like, 35 degrees, honestly, I can deal with that. No big deal, I can do. And now it's got a little colder today. And then I looked at the weather forecast for caucus night. I'm going to have to go shopping to get some extra layers. I don't have that stuff. So we'll see. I hope we were able to do it. I want to thank Chip and Tom Massie for being here. Thanks for their support. I also want to thank Governor Kim Reynolds for her support. Great governor. And you guys are lucky in Iowa because I have people every corner of the country comes to Florida at one point or another. And they talk to me about what's going on in their states. And I hear horror stories from California. I hear horror stories from Illinois. I hear horror stories from New York. The Iowans that come to Florida are very happy with how Iowa's governed. You got good members of the legislature, you got a great governor, and you're producing great results. So that's what we need for this whole country, what you guys have done in Iowa and what we've done in Florida. Now, Tom Massie has got this, they mentioned it, he wears on his jacket a national debt clock. So just like they have, I think, in Times Square where it's
Union Square.
He takes it around, shows it. These guys have to look at that when they're voting to increase our debt and continuing on the madness. And so he got me one. I think we were in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago. He got me one, and I was like, that's neat. But I said, is there a way you could do a debt clock for the state of Florida? Because instead of counting upwards in Florida, you'd be counting the debt going down in Florida because we're paying off on it. Imagine that. You're actually getting the job done. And I think with these other states, New York, for example, is the closest state to Florida in terms of population, but we have millions of more people now than New York State does. And yet our budget is half the size of New York's budget. We have the lowest percentage of state workers per capita in the entire country. And yet, small government, and yet when people move from New York to Florida, what do they tell me? They go, oh my gosh, your infrastructure is so much better. Your roads are nicer, your services are more efficient, and your schools are better. So how are we able to do this at half the footprint and half the cost? Because it shows you so much of government is just bloat. We can reduce this federal government dramatically and not miss a beat for the things that actually need to be done for this country. And that's what we need to do. So we've got a job to do ahead of us, and Iowa gets to start on January 15th. I don't think that media determines who the Republican is. Well, actually, in some respects, you can look at who does the media most not want to be the nominee? Me. For Republican voters, that should be the best endorsement I could ever receive. I mean, that's just the way it is. So, but they don't get to decide, pundits don't decide, Iowans get to decide, and Iowans get to go out and make their voice heard. And this is going to be very consequential. For those of you who have committed to caucus for us, thank you. Make sure you bring friends, family, co-workers, bring people out. Because this is going to be, in terms of bang for your buck and a vote, this will be one of the most powerful votes you'll ever get to cast. I mean, there's not that many people actually show up in the grand scheme of things, and yet this is going to have an outside influence on the direction of our country. Because we need a candidate, who obviously can appeal to Republicans and win a Republican nomination, then of course win the general election in November like we did in Florida in a big way. But most important than that, we need a president who's going to deliver on all these things for us. We need to get the results, and we got to do it now. We got to do that. So we hope that you're bringing, and if you are willing to commit to us after this, please sign up and do it. We've been able to see, as the calendar shifted, we're now in the election year. We're seeing a lot of people come to these events, which is great. So we've got a lot of real estate that we can get on our side, and we have no other choice. I refuse to be amongst the only generation of Americans in history to leave to our kids and grandkids an America less prosperous and less free than the one we inherited. I am not going to just sit idly by and watch the managed decline of the United States. I don't think that this trajectory that we're on is inevitable. I think it's a choice. We have it within our power to reverse this decline. We have it within our power to give this country a new birth of freedom. And we have it within our power to usher in a revival of the American spirit. And we should accept nothing less from the nominee of the Republican Party and the next president of the United States. I'm the only one running who can say that I've delivered on 100% of my promises. In Florida, when I promised I would do something, I didn't it just wasn't idle talk. I actually said, okay, I've said this stuff, I got to go make it happen, and we do. You know, this stuff on campaign, you know, what is it? Just a slogan you say you're going to build the wall or drain the swamp? Or are you actually going to build the wall and drain the swamp? I mean, that's what we need, somebody that's going to be able to follow through, and our record on that is second to none. The other thing, though, is we have a situation in this country where the political left is causing huge amounts of damage across all these different aspects of our society. The economy, the border, K-12 education, the bureaucracy, higher ed, all this stuff. I'm the only one running for president that has beaten these people time and time again in the state of Florida. We beat the teachers union on universal school choice and making sure schools were open during COVID, and now most recently with protecting teachers against forced union dues. And now you have a lot of them that aren't joining, and places like Miami-Dade, third largest school union in America, is on the brink of decertification. So we're getting results with what we're doing. We beat Dr. Fauci on COVID. We beat him on the mandate. We beat him on the lockdowns. We beat him on the mask. All this stuff. We beat him on schools. And Florida is doing great as a result of that. We beat George Soros on crime. 2 prosecutors that we had would not enforce the law faithfully, just like you see prosecutors not doing that in Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles. I removed both of them from their posts. They are no longer in office. We also have backed the men and women of law enforcement and stood by them. And as a result, Florida's crime rate is at a 50-year low. It's not true in a lot of other places. We beat the Democrats on election integrity. We have banned ballot harvesting in the state of Florida. We have banned Zuckerbucks in the state of Florida. We have universal voter ID, and we actually count the votes on election night and report the results the same day of the election. Imagine that. We also beat the left by banning China from purchasing land in the state of Florida. No farmland, no land near military, critical infrastructure, none of that. Why would we want a hostile country to be able to come in and gobble up these key pieces of real estate? And we need to do that all across the United States of America. So we have fought these fights and we have won these fights. And it's going to take nothing less than that to be able to turn this country around. You know, I'm also the only person running for president that has served in our nation's military and worn the uniform. And many veterans here, thank you for wearing the uniform and thank you for serving our country. But I think it's important because it's been a while since we've had a veteran, I think since 1988, who served in a foreign war, get elected president. It will help me, one, to put veterans issues on the front burner, because there's a lot we need to be doing for our veterans that we've not done a good job on, and we'll do that. Second, I completely recognize the problems we're having with the culture of our military, how it's been used for political purposes, to advance a social agenda, woke ideology getting in. Day one as Commander-in-Chief, I rip all of that out and throw it in the trash, and we restore the military. And then it also, just as somebody who served in Iraq and was with a lot of people that did multiple tours, I understand decisions that a commander-in-chief makes, the impact that it has on folks. And so I would not make any decision very lightly. I'm not going to put our troops in harm's way unless they have a clear mission and they have everything they need to achieve their mission. And we should expect nothing less from any president. Putting them out there like Biden is to toil in Syria and just getting shot at and rockets at by these Iranian groups. That is not the way you stand by our troops, to allow this nonsense that's going on. So when I'll be there, we'll have a very strong policy. People are not going to want to mess with us, but if there ever needs to be a situation where our troops need to be used, we're going to go all in, we're going to win, and we're going to bring them home. That's what you guys do. So I look at some of the stuff, these guys are great members of Congress. We've got some good ones. We don't have enough of them on the Republican side, and certainly not a lot on the other side of the aisle either. And yes, electing better people will help, and we can do a lot as president, of course, but there's also like a longer term issue here where the reason you get these bad outcomes out of Washington is because the incentives are to produce bad outcomes. 5 of the 8 wealthiest counties in our country are suburbs of Washington, D.C. How did that happen? Well, it happened because, what they're doing is good for the people that are connected to the political class. Not so much good for the rest of us, but it is good for them. So those are the incentives. So I think we need to do things to change the incentives. That's why I'm a big believer in term limits for members of Congress. That's why I'm a big believer in a balanced budget requirement for the Constitution. That's why I'm a big believer in the line item veto for the president. You want to talk about fiscal responsibility? As governor, I get this, I get it, I get a budget, and I can veto out individual spending items. And I vetoed one year, I vetoed 3% of the entire budget. So you can do that. President gets this massive bill, and it shouldn't be one massive bill, but it usually is. Gets a massive bill, and you either sign it and fund everything, or veto it and fund nothing. And so that's not a good recipe. And yet that's one of the reasons why your tax dollars get spent to do things like promote transgenderism in Bangladesh. Like, that shouldn't happen. And yet you see that. So how do you do? Well, if the president had the ability to do that, you would be able to take out so much largesse and so much pork. It would be a huge, huge thing. So you got to work through the states to do that. We will do that. I'll lead the charge from the bully pulpit, and we're going to get some changes. The other thing that I've always thought was good, and I sponsored this back in the day, I'd like to see a 28th Amendment to the Constitution that says very simply, Congress shall make no law respecting the citizens of the United States that does not also apply to members of Congress themselves. That would be a really good thing. So this is our time for choosing. My wife and I are they back there? Do they want to come out? Where are they at? Do they see if they want to come out? We got anyone out here? So my wife and I, we've got a first grader, a kindergartner, and a preschooler. There's our kindergartner. Okay. All right. Are they ready? You got ketchup. Oh, man. All right. He's not that happy because the Jaguars seem like they're getting their butt kicked right now. So he's a big football guy. So we have young kids, and so just as parents, we're very concerned about what kind of America they're going to have 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but 25, 30 years from now. And so that's a big motivation for us to run. But I'll tell you, I'm also motivated to run because we owe a debt of gratitude to people in prior generations that have sacrificed so that we can be free. Our founding fathers, when they went to create the Constitution in 1787, they went to Philadelphia with having studied the history of every republic and the history of mankind, because they wanted to draw lessons from all of those experiences. And the one thing that they identified, the one common thread that all those republics had, was this: every single one of them had failed. And so they understood it fell to the United States of America to determine, can people really govern themselves? Can you have a society based on the idea that our rights come from God, not from government? That we live under a rule of law, not the rule of individual rulers? Or is mankind forever destined to live under various forms of despotism? They fully expected that this country would decide that question once and for all. But they knew that what they did in Philadelphia and what they had done previously with the Declaration of Independence, that didn't ultimately answer that question. That just gave us a chance to answer the question. When Benjamin Franklin walked out of the convention, he was asked, did you give us a republic or a monarchy? And his answer was a republic if you can keep it. And Ronald Reagan pointed out, freedom's one generation away from extinction. It's not passed along in the bloodstream. They understood that every generation would have to step up and defend freedom when it was threatened. And I'm reminded of this when I fly into Washington, D.C. When you go in to Reagan Airport, you sometimes take a route that takes the plane flush parallel to our National Mall. So if you look out the left side of the plane, you see beautiful panoramic view, Lincoln Memorial, the reflecting pool, up the Washington Monument, other monuments, and then up perched on the hill, the beautiful U.S. Capitol building. You feel a sense of pride as an American, because those are ideals and principles represented on those monuments that have made this country great and unique. But after doing that a few times, I realized best monuments to our country and to freedom are not the left side of the plane on the National Mall. Because if you looked out the other side of the plane, you look over the Potomac River, you see a series of small, nondescript monuments orderly arranged over the rolling hills of a place called Arlington National Cemetery. And I believe that then, and I believe it now. You can have the best Declaration of Independence in the world, you can have the best Constitution in the world. These things do not run on autopilot. They require every generation of Americans to step up and defend freedom, and sometimes put on a uniform, risk your life, and even give that last full measure of devotion for service to this country. Now, in this political season, we're not called upon to make sacrifices of that nature. But what we are called upon to do is to do justice to the sacrifices of people who are memorialized in places like Arlington National Cemetery. What we are called upon to do is to preserve what George Washington called the sacred fire of liberty. This was a fire that burned in Independence Hall in 1776 when 56 men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to create a new nation conceived in liberty. It's a fire that burned at a cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, when our nation's first Republican president pledged this nation to a new birth of freedom. It's a fire that burned on the beaches of Normandy when a merry band of brothers stormed the shores, defeated Nazi Germany, and preserved liberty throughout the world. It's a fire that burned at the foot of the Berlin Wall in 1987 when a resolute Republican president stood in front of that wall and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," eventually seeing the dissolution of the Soviet Union. This is our responsibility, to carry this torch and to preserve this sacred fire of liberty. This is not a responsibility we should shy away from. This is a responsibility that we should welcome. Because if not now, when? And if not us, who? I'm asking for your support on January 15th in the Iowa caucus. I'll be somebody as a candidate that will get the job done electorally, just like we did in Florida, and we'll win and win big. As a leader, I'll always conduct myself in a way that you can be proud of. And as your president, I don't care what they throw at me. I will get the job done, and I will not let you down. Thank you all. God bless you. All right. Anybody have any questions?
I've got one.
I want to stand out of respect. It's very difficult being my question. Given our more recent historical treatment by the United Nations, our revenue expended by our citizens for the United Nations, do you feel that that entity should be dissolved?
I will defund the United Nations. Yeah. We should not be funding the United Nations. I mean, honestly, it's a total farce of an organization. The anti-Semitism, anti-Israel, it's like a rogues gallery. You have Iran on the Human Rights Council. And you know, just like the way I view it is like your tax dollars. It's not the government's money. I mean, like the Democrats will say, like, oh my gosh, you know, Biden gave you this or that. And I'm like, no, wait a minute, it's not his money, it's your money. So can I justify going up to a truck driver and say, hey, we need you to pay taxes so that I can send to the United Nations? No, I cannot do that. And that's a contrast in this race because Trump funded it gladly all 4 years, and Haley was in the United Nations and justified funding the United Nations when she was testifying in Congress under oath. I've never had any use for it, and we will absolutely defund the United Nations.
Yeah, going. I was going to add one thing to it. It's, and I carried the bill to defund the United Nations in Congress, and but I would like to point out one additional thing, respectfully, about the former governor and ambassador of the United Nations. In addition to having been there at a time when we were building up to $12.5 billion a year that we funded the United Nations, we were funding during that time what's called UNRWA, right? The United Nations like World Refugee Assistance, whatever it's called, with massive amount of money going to the Palestinians that we know is going to Hamas. I think that we need leadership that would never do that, as opposed to just sitting there and accepting it while representing us at the United Nations. I think that matters in a case like this. We were funding our enemies that are now going against Israel and against our interests.
Just real quick, I'm a co-sponsor Chip's bill. It needs to pass. But also, the governor's mentioned before, there are other international organizations that are extra constitutional. Like, you don't elect people to those international organizations, and they shouldn't have control over us. We're a sovereign country, and one of these organizations the governor's talked about before is the WHO, and we cannot let them affect our own sovereignty.
So do people know about the World Health Organization? So huge problems, but first of all, even if there weren't huge problems, we should not be giving up our sovereignty to these international organizations. We're a republic of Americans, and we should be governed by the American people under the Constitution. So I have an opposition to doing that, period. But WHO, bad news, they have a pandemic treaty. It's a lockdown treaty, basically. Biden has agreed to it. I don't think it could actually be ratified by the Senate, but they're trying to basically implement that across the federal government. I work with my legislature in Florida to sign a law that says we don't recognize the WHO lockdown treaty in Florida. But as president on day one, January 20th, 2025, I take the WHO lockdown treaty, tear it in half, and throw it in the trash can, and it's done. One more thing. Because I thought about UN and Haley. Like, look, I mean, first of all, she says that Iowa's votes need to be corrected and all this other stuff. It's just ridiculous. But, she was asked yesterday, why she said Hillary Clinton was an inspiration to her. And her response was that she never said that. That is a lie. She wrote that in her book. She's told the story. She's on video doing this. And it's like, okay, you were inspired to run for office, not by Ronald Reagan, not by Margaret Thatcher, but by Hillary Clinton. Just own it. You have video, this is on tape and everything, to tell Iowans that she never said that, when that's just factually false. That should show you, are you somebody, a candidate that's coming here saying things, then you change your personality to go in the next state and then keep doing that? Or like Popeye, I can say, I am what I am. Like, I'm going to tell you it's great. I don't have to make all those adjustments. I don't have to do that stuff. So that's one thing. The other thing, though, just in terms of saying what you need to do for following through. So like the former president, he's running on saying that he's going to do an executive order on birthright citizenship. And I don't think people come illegally are entitled to birthright citizenship, so I think that needs to be done. But he ran in 2016 saying the exact same thing. So he got in, he had 4 years. All he had to do was sign an executive order. It would have taken 30 seconds. He could have sat down, gotten it, signed it, done. 4 years, never signed the executive order on birthright citizenship. So now he's saying he's going to do what he could have done the first 4 years. He's got to ask yourself, okay, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me on this. And so he had a chance to do it. He didn't get the job done. You can't have any assurance that he would actually follow through, even if he could get elected going forward.
As a young person in college, I am among the vast minority of voters on a college campus. So a couple of things. How do you plan on appealing to a young voter audience, a young demographic? Because I really think that is the future, obviously, of our country. And another thing, a different subject, the World Economic Forum. What has your relationship been with them, if any? Have you had any contact? And yourself, are you involved in that in any way?
None. In fact, I've done stuff in Florida where we've said that that the policies at places like the World Economic Forum are dead on arrival in Florida, and so that's been anti-ESG, that's been anti-central bank digital currency, all those things. Haley was a big World Economic Forum person, so she's bragged about that in the past. I know Trump has met with them and has complimented them in the past. but I've never been involved with them, and I've taken positions opposite them because I think their positions are very destructive for this country. So you can count on me as president. World Economic Forum, done. Not going to have any purchase in our administration. Yeah, it's important. And then on young people, look, how do you appeal to young people? To me, freedom. Think about it. What was the biggest incursion on freedom for young people in our lifetime were COVID lockdowns and restrictions and vax mandates. In Florida, I protected the young people from that. I went to my universities when they were in the fall of 2020, and I said, you do not restrict these kids, you don't police their social lives, and then eventually you're not allowed to force them to take a COVID shot. And the result was our students got to live normal lives. You know, they would go out, they would have fun. A lot of them would get COVID, they'd get over it, none of them would even go to the hospital, and then it happened. So like that was a much better way than to try to isolate people. It's a much better way to try to force them to have to take a shot that they don't want. And oh, by the way, with these young people, COVID was a very, very minimal, infinitesimal risk. That shot may have even been more of a risk than that. So how could you justify forcing that on people? So the left and the Democrats, if something like this happened again, they would run the same playbook. They would. You already are seeing they're trying to do mandates again in some of these deep blue enclaves. They're not going to ever let this go until you get someone like me, and I'm the only one that will do this. Get me in as president, and I'm going to bring a reckoning to these people for what they did during COVID. All these agencies, we're going to have major accountability because we can never let this happen to our country ever again. Yes.
Thank you, Governor DeSantis. I know you're very strong in education policy, but you've also stated you want to get rid of the Department of Education. So how will you influence education policy without a Department of Education?
Great question. What's your name? Conrad, great job. Well, so I do not think the Federal Department of Education has the right to interfere with Iowa and how they're handling education on curriculum matters and things like that. It's just not part of the constitutional mandate. So in terms of K-12 education, I want to get the Department of Education off the bat. Now, he has the bill to abolish it, but even if Congress wouldn't pass that, we are gonna liberate K-12 systems from that. Now, how would you influence? Well, there's a lot of funding that goes to different stuff, and I'm not even saying all the funding is justified, but it's Congress's prerogative. We have every right to condition the funding on certain things. So you can do that. The other thing you can do for universities is federal government approves the accreditation bodies. So this is something that is so behind the scenes, and I didn't appreciate the influence of it until I became governor. But you wonder, why are these universities like this? Why do you have this DE&I, very discriminatory stuff? How did that get there? How does all this? And part of the reason is because when they go to get accredited, these accreditors are really pushing them in that direction. And the federal government approves who's a valid accreditor and who's not. So when we're instead of accreditors saying you can only get accredited if you do DEI, we can say you're only going to get accredited if you don't discriminate and if you don't do DEI. So we're going to be able to do through the accreditation, I think, a lot of stuff. And then this final thing I'd say, we've done a big push in Florida for American civics education. I think it's important that people understand the founding principles of this country, the Constitution, all these things that people are talking about. And we've really got a generation where we've dropped the ball on doing that. We want to graduate students that have a foundation in what it means to be an American. You don't want to graduate a bunch of blank slates. We created a great curriculum. We have education program for the teachers. It's a 50-hour course. They get a $3,000 bonus if they complete it. Talks about all the foundations that led to the formation of America. Really, really good. So we'll have that. We're going to package that federally. We're not going to mandate it, but I think we'll be able to provide that for folks so that they can do it. And the thing is, the people that have gone through that course, the teachers, it's got like a 90% approval rate amongst teachers. And obviously not all teachers are like, conservative constitutionalists. I mean, like, they're going, and it's valuable. So, and here's the thing, you've got to do that because the colleges and universities are not giving students a good foundation in the core aspects of American history anymore. So you got to work to really do that.
Governor, I add one thing on that to both of your all's points. I'm going to go back to you about something for younger voters, because the governor, I mean, his track record is pretty extraordinary in some areas that people don't talk about. There's a lot of young people in Florida that are excited about the fact that he led the greatest conservation of the Everglades in the history of Florida. Right? We conservatives want to conserve. Right? You've got a wildlife path through the state of Florida, and you're protecting the Everglades, rather than this kind of radical leftist notion of shutting down our economy and empowering China while they're pursuing a radical leftist agenda for the Green New Deal. The governor's actually making Florida a great place to live with clean air, clean water, and a place for our wildlife. That's very attractive to younger voters when we get on that message. And with respect to education, making sure our kids aren't getting saddled with a 4-year degree and, as the governor says, gender studies, right? And rather than maybe getting a vocational degree or being able to go do some other stuff that's better for students, and not having a student loan program that is indebting our country rather than having universities be on the hook.
And since I do carry the bill to eliminate the Federal Department of Education, let me tell you the genesis of that bill. When Trump was going to appoint Betsy DeVos, I got hundreds of phone calls to my office. People wanted me to vote against her confirmation. There's just one problem with that. I'm not a senator, I'm a representative, and we don't vote on confirmation. And the callers would say I was just making excuses, that I could do something about Betsy DeVos. So I did something. I wrote a one-sentence bill that says the Department of Education shall terminate on December 31st. And because I don't think that Trump should decide who, how, or what your children learn. And this kind of, it's a good point, but it's a pro-education point. Let me say this. There's $400 million spent at the Department of Education bureaucracy. There are 4,000 bureaucrats there making an average of $100,000 a year. You could take that money, and I think this is probably what the governor would do, give it back to the states or let the states keep it. That's another teacher in every county in the United States who could make $100,000 a year.
No, for sure. And the other thing I think, and there would be a federal role for this, not through a Department of Education, but through the Treasury and a tax credit. Now, Florida, we have universal school choice. And I know Iowa's done great in that recently too. But now in Florida, a family can go to their local school, just like when we grew up. But you can also go to a charter school, which is a public school, but not controlled by the school district or influenced by the school unions. Or you can take a scholarship, go to a private school. But then because there's so much competition for students within school districts, public school districts, you often can choose multiple schools even within a school district. So families are really empowered to make meaningful choices regardless of income level. And what's the result been in Florida? The result is we're now ranked #1 in the nation in education by U.S. News and World Report. We're ranked 3rd and 4th respectively in 4th grade reading and 4th grade math. So, and we're a very demographically diverse state, a big state. And so if you look at that, it's really powerful. Our charter school population, 365,000 students, if that were its own state and it was ranked, and this is a group of 365 students that are disproportionately low income, disproportionately racial and ethnic minorities. If that were its own state, it would rank in the top 5 for student achievement, just our charter population. So what it shows is, contrary to some type of conventional wisdom, people can succeed from all walks of life, but they just have to be and have the tools or be in the right environment to be able to do it. We've done that. So federally, what we can do is do a school choice private scholarship program through corporate tax credits, not through Department of Education, not through federal bureaucracy. Corporations can write off a certain amount of their federal income tax, corporate income tax liability. This is what we modeled after this in Florida. It goes to a scholarship organization that runs the program, and then you set the income limit, and then people can do it. We service 100,000 kids a year in Florida for $1 billion between administrative costs and scholarship. So if we just did 25 billion or 50 billion, which is budget dust to these guys, you're talking about millions of kids that could be liberated. I mean, Chicago, they don't have a chance. Some of these places. So we are going to do that nationally. We'll do it through the tax credit. Not going to do it through federal regulation of the Department of Education, but we will do it for that. All right.
Disabilities,
You got
please.
it. You got- Yes, sir.
Yeah, so there are so many serious issues our country is facing. I mean, we could be here all day discussing the individual ones. Can you name a common core issue at the root? What is going on that's causing so many problems, and how could your administration address?
And your
some
name
of them?
is?
James.
James. Well, I think the way you frame that is helpful, because I think what you're inferring is correct. A lot of our problems are symptoms of an underlying problem, and I think that there's a couple things, but for me, one of them is, we've really broken faith with the founding principles of this country, and broken faith with the Constitution and the design. That's impacted our culture. It's impacted a lot of things. The principles of this country were founded on our sound. They're enduring. And when we're abiding by that and faithful to it, we tend to do pretty good. When we get away from it, we tend to have a lot of turbulence and have a lot of problems. And so I think we're in an era where we have a massive bureaucracy that basically governs us without our consent. You've got all these problems in inner cities with crime. You've got problems with the budget and the debt and all this. And I think it's just that underlying, there's lack of a foundation about why are we here as Americans, what's the proper role of government, and we got to restore that. And so when I talk about reviving the American spirit, that's part of what I mean by doing that. If you get the foundational posture right, I do think it makes it much easier to be able to do a lot of these other things. Yep.
So about disabilities, I ask this question a lot. I go to all the events to bring up the plight of these people. They don't have enough. $600 on average. A lot of them bring in less than $600. There's nowhere in this country.
Social Security?
SSI, SSDI. They're punished if they try to work. If they get married, they're punished. Veterans if they get married, they get additional $1,500. But someone who's on SSI, born here but got in an accident before they're 22, if they get married, they lose it. If they try to work, they lose it. I could take you to people not only in Iowa, but New Hampshire, Nevada, and most other states. They're living in abandoned trailers. They're living in buildings that should be condemned because the federal government, and I've given Chip this, I'll give this to you, Tom, as well, they don't have enough. They're dying. Half of the suicides in the country, out of 49,449, half of them are disabled.
So I think it's good. So Thomas will look at that, so we appreciate that. I mean, I think one thing he does say makes sense. I mean, in terms of disability, you can be disabled partially, and maybe, it's good if you want to maybe work and earn some income, right? But I think it's a fine line of, there's some people that will kind of fake being disabled, then work, and then they should, whatever. But I do think that if somebody, has a disability, and it prevents them from reaching their full potential and they're eligible, fine. But if then they can do some type of employment that could supplement, I don't think that would be a bad thing, and I think that would be a good incentive. Now, there's a lot of fraud in the program, and I think that's been a huge issue. You guys have probably dealt with some of the stuff. I mean, unfortunately, it's just massive. And I remember seeing instances where people were getting, kind of top of the line, as much disability as possible, and then they would be, someone would get suspicious. They'd look, this guy's like, a roofer, has a roof, doing all this. Like, all right, well, I mean, either you're disabled or you're not. So there has been a big problem with fraud. Yes, sir, back there.
All right, first of all, we just got back from Florida from the Citrus Bowl.
Oh, sorry about that. My powers as governor are limited. I have a non-interference clause in bowl games, so sorry about that.
Comment number one, we love your state. We love how it's run. We love everything about it. All right, number two, I hope there's a vice president behind you right there. Number three, you need to stay in this through the convention.
Yes.
Because the first person might be in jail. All right.
Yes.
And Iowa is not the be all and end all. I'm in Iowa and I love Iowa, but people win Iowa and do not become president, and people lose Iowa and become president. So we need you to stay through the convention and hang tough. And we love you, Governor.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks so much. Look, I agree with you. And I've said, I put a lot of time into it because I think it's important, and I think that Iowa gives you an opportunity to be on the ground and get underneath all the media chatter and just talk to people face to face, and Iowans appreciate that. But anybody saying somehow like we're only doing that, that's just a flat out lie. You have to be built for the long haul. We've got a great organization in these other early states. You have some candidates like Haley, she didn't even get on the ballot in Nevada for the caucus there. And so we're definitely doing that. I think, there's always these things they try to do in caucuses, or they try to plant this rumor, all that stuff. I think Iowans know that that's just typical scuttlebutt, that's not, they're going to try to, Trump will do whatever he can. So as caucus night, they'll try to make something up, but make no mistake, we've got a mission, we've got to complete this mission. It's a long process, it's an arduous process. I think Iowa is going to be a great way for us to start the process, but we certainly have a lot of road after that, and we're girded for that long battle. So thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Oh, that's a question now.
So I'll let these guys talk about what they're going to do in Congress on that. My view is people in D.C. have cared more about Ukraine than our own border here in this country. And more important, by the way, than recognizing the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. And when you talk about hundreds of billions of dollars, that's a lot of money there. And obviously Biden has no clue as to kind of how this is all going to end. And so I think they've really been funding a stalemate there. And so a president that's responsible, I think, would find a way to bring this to a conclusion. Because I don't think it's in our interest to just be doing $100 billion a year indefinitely. For what? For you're not seeing any major differences here in terms of it's likely to be a battle of attrition. But clearly, regardless of how you view about that, you can't care more about that than our own border here in the United States. And we have 8 million people that have come in here. That is a threat to this country. That is a threat to this nation's security. There absolutely have been terrorists that have come across the southern border. And then as president, my two top priorities of national security is the border at home, but abroad, it is recognizing the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. And Biden is not doing what needs to be done to be able to deter China. China recognizes one thing: hard power. That's what they care about. And if they look in their region and see there's a deficit of that, they're more likely to do something like invade Taiwan or even beyond that. If we have adequate hard power there, that will deny them the ability to do that. That's going to require that we do more with the military, particularly with the Navy. I will do that. Also requires us to recognize that we are intertwined domestically or economically with China in a way that's not healthy. We're dependent on them for so many things that are really important for our country's survival. We need to restore our economic independence. We need to reshore some of these key manufacturing here in the United States. And then finally, recognizing China's cultural impact here domestically. That's why I banned China from buying land in Florida and kicked them out of our universities. We need to do that nationwide. They're in our universities. They are trying to buy this land, and I just don't think that's good for our national security. Yes, sir. Right here, right here.
Thank you for attending Cedar Grove Church this morning.
Yes. Yeah.
And are you going to drill?
Absolutely, 100%. We have our energy. We have more energy reserves than any place in the country, any place in the world. And we're going to open it all up on day one. We're going to reverse the Green New Deal. I want to lower gas prices for Americans, which is important. Lower energy costs overall for not just Americans, but for the economy, which will impact inflation in a positive way. But then this is our top, arguably top national security silver bullet too, because the people that are adverse to us, Iran, Russia, China, and a dominant America with energy is bad for them. If we do the Green New Deal, we got to go beg for energy from Venezuela and Saudi, and that's good for Russia and China and for Iran. So I think it's a no-brainer. And if you look, we have enough natural gas in, say, the Marcellus Shale to last centuries. I mean, centuries. And so obviously we'll use it for us, but we can export it to nations so that they don't have to worry about Russia. They don't have to worry about some of these other folks. So it's a huge, huge lever geopolitically. Biden wants to do the Green New Deal. That will lead to rolling blackouts in this country, like they have in California. Because what you're going to have is, at the one time they're trying to kneecap reliable energy, they're mandating things like electric vehicles, which is going to force you to use more electricity. So the grid is not going to be able to handle this, and it's going to be a big, big problem. And look, in Florida, it's sensitive for us. Look, we've actually got solar power in Florida, but when a hurricane comes, I need to get that power back on. I need reliable energy. I mean, I need the oil and gas. I can't rely on solar for that situation. So reliable is key. You know, we're going to do that. You're going to have federal lands. All this stuff is going to be opened up, and I think it's going to be really, really good for consumers.
Governor, just to add one point to that as the resident Texan here on the drill question. Look, joking aside, right? I mean, it is a critical aspect of our national economy. And if you want to get inflation down, get American energy cranking again instead of being crippled by this administration. Right? And the governor is exactly right to the Ukraine question. Like, my biggest problem with Ukraine is we write a $113 billion check that goes into pensions and the bureaucrats in Ukraine, not just to legal aid, and we're perpetuating conflict while we're basically giving up the game prematurely, right? We didn't deal with the pipeline. We're not exporting liquefied natural gas. We're basically making it easier for Putin and Russia, so we're losing before we even start while we then fund ongoing conflict. We got to win by peace through strength by making America strong with strong American energy. And the last point on the EVs, which of course Tom can talk about better than all of us because he knows how they work. But on the EVs, they're piling up on automobile dealers' lots right now. We're crippling automobile dealerships. We have a mandate that's about to go into place for 2/3 EV vehicles by 2032. Do you know what that will do to ethanol and what it will do to gas and drilling in Texas? It will kill us, and it will empower China. So we need a president that will reverse that on day one.
So Tom Massie, interesting guy, MIT engineer, knows all this. So his house is totally off the grid. He hasn't paid for electricity in how long? 20 years. He powers his house with a combination of solar panels and a Tesla battery that he engineered. And he drives a Tesla, but he's the only one I've ever seen whose Tesla has a license plate that reads Kentucky Coal.
Well, that's where the power comes from, is coal.
Chris, you're the best governor in the country. I watched the debates in 2018. I'm so glad you did the interview.
Oh, yeah.
You were so smart, and you were so awesome. I think you and Governor Haley are both a huge improvement over Trump. He creates more Democrats. People come out to vote just to vote against him. So you and Haley will be a huge improvement. Judge is saying that they're going to drop it.
That's a lie, yeah, that's total lie, yeah, total lie.
Please stay in.
Oh, yeah, no. When they're doing that, they are trying to trick you guys by doing this. They're going to do some anonymous source. They do this to me all the time. Anonymous sources have said this, and then they run with it. They say, oh, this person doing this. No. That's a fake source that you guys are manufacturing. So do we honestly believe these outlets? And that really was a sketchy report. So these are just, it shows you though who they don't want to win. Who they really don't want to win, guys. I mean, it couldn't be more apparent. So yeah, 100%. You than you.
Okay, you mentioned truck drivers before. I am a truck driver. I worked all the way through COVID, never stopped. Instead of more speed regulations slowing us down, how about we make the shippers get us loaded and unloaded in a timely manner? I spent 17 hours at General Mills in Carlisle 3 weeks ago trying to get loaded. 17 hours.
Wow.
It takes 3 hours to get loaded some places. I've been loaded as fast as 20 minutes. I've been unloaded in 17 hours. I don't get paid if I'm not moving.
So it's interesting. Well, one, I mean, I think that in Florida, we recognize the importance of truck drivers. When I became governor, we were doing about 600, producing about 600 a year. Now we're doing 3,500. We've expanded slots and everything. But when the Port of Long Beach was having the big backups and everything, I said, because they were like, well, Port of Long Beach may go to 24/7. I'm like, we always do 24/7 in Florida. So I was like, yeah. So we actually had companies move from California and the ports to Florida, and we've been able to do it. So I think our ports likely handle that a lot better than some of the California ports and probably some of the other ones in other parts of the East Coast.
I always said, if you pay a driver $200 an hour to sit, it's amazing how many dock doors will suddenly be open.
That's right. All right. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, this will be the last question.
Oh, thank you for speaking with us. I have a couple of things. Can we know your favorite Bible verse?
The favorite what?
Bible verse. You have a favorite Bible verse?
John 14:6.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit?
I'm the way, the truth, and the life.
Amen. All the all the fake stuff is right now. Don't be surprised, you know what I'm saying? And get your money, against the Lord like that. Keep going, be encouraged. This is the power of victory.
That's right. No, absolutely. Yeah, we're gonna do it. Yeah, we're gonna do it. So listen, we're getting close. A little bit more than a week away. Now's the time to be active. Now's the time where you guys can make a difference. Not just, obviously I'm the candidate, but I'm just a vessel for all this. It's really a movement to change the trajectory of this country and to restore the greatness of America. So we have it within our power to do it. So if you've committed for us, bring a bunch of people. I hope the rest of you will commit to us today. We've got ways you can sign up and do the whole 9 yards. And I hope you'll bring a lot of people. It's going to be very, very cold. So these are really committed caucus goers who really are passionate about fixing this country. And I know that is likely most of the people in this room. Thank you, and God bless you all.